Now, first and foremost, we need to understand some things that the Bible does not condone a lot of things, but when there are laws that are created in the Old Testament, it's primarily because the thing that the law is referring to is something that God does not want to happen. Think about it. You don't create laws to regulate things that God does want to happen. No, you create laws to regulate things that God does not want to happen.
Okay, so what? Kind of embarrassing to open up like that. What do you mean you don't regulate laws for things that you want to happen? Children obey your parents. Like,
Let me give you an example. The Bible has all sorts of laws about what happens when a man murders another man or another woman. But does that mean that God condones murder just because there are laws in the Bible that talk about what you should do if murder happens?
God does condone murder. God has drowned so many people during the Great Flood. Uh, God sanctions a lot of, the sanctions the right word? Anyways, guides a lot of genocides that happen in the Bible, gives them tips on how to, take the women, kill all the men, bash the babies' heads. There's a lot of tips about all these things that God condones. No?
But let's talk about divorce. The Bible does not condone or encourage divorce, but God, even through Jesus in the New Testament, says, I know that your hearts are hard. You're going to do it anyway. And so, because I know you're going to get divorced anyway, let me make sure that there are laws in place in your culture to ensure that people are going to be treated properly in situations that are less than ideal.
What? That is so stupid. That is so dumb. It's like I know your hearts are hard and you're gonna do it anyway, so I'm gonna put in law. Okay, why didn't he give that same thing for like shellfish and wearing mixed fabrics? It feels like God is very certain on certain things. Like, this group of people, you're not allowed to shave your heads. Women, you should go and be in a tent when you're bleeding. Don't eat shellfish. Don't tattoo your body. But then when it comes to like divorce, it's like, I mean, I don't want you to do it, but if you have to do it, that kind of gives like, like it's okay to do it in these certain situations, which means he's not completely against it. He's completely against shellfish, and he was like, nah, don't do that stuff. But he's not clearly not completely against things like divorce and abortion.
And outside of God's perfect will. Another example is the Bible has laws about what should happen if somebody has sex with an animal, right? Does it mean that God is condoning bestiality? No. He's setting up laws to make sure that the community knows how to handle situations when people get out of line.
What do you think?
That's a lie.
It is.
Because God doesn't need to make space for us.
You're God.
He's God. He made the 10 Commandments and was like, these are the rules. You follow them. He doesn't need to be like, I see that you guys are doing
Murderers
this thing, so we should
make
make
concessions.
concessions for that. And the way he's making it sound as if God is like doing the good thing by setting up the limits of what we can and cannot do in terms of like we're not there yet, but in terms of slavery is weird because he can just be like, don't have slaves.
Literally, because he did
He
say,
does that.
do not eat shellfish. Like, there's some things that God is very strict about, right? And it's just weird that slavery, which is where we're going with this video, isn't one of them. Like, how is he more passionate about making sure people don't eat shellfish compared to owning slaves? Like, God's priorities seem a bit crazy if you really think about it. Like, what?
And that is exactly what's happening here with the concept of slavery. It was never God's intent for a person to be the property of another person. But God, once again, knows that these things are going to happen, and He wants to make sure that the community is not going to take advantage of this and mistreat people who are going to become slaves in a couple of ways, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Okay, I'm trying to be calm and not shout because then I have to fix that in editing. Okay. Why should God pander to us when we are His creation? Like, it's just weird that He's like, oh, I know you're going to uh, do this slavery thing, so I'm just gonna make sure that you follow my guidelines for slavery. If God is all powerful, all knowing, can He not just say, do not do this? Because He does set hard limits throughout the Bible. I don't understand why this wasn't a hard limit. You'd be like, oh, but people are gonna do it anyways. Yeah, people are gonna fornicate. But God made it a hard limit to be like, do not fornicate. People are gonna lie, but God made it a hard limit, like, do not lie. People are gonna steal your tithes, but God was like, nah, I will strike you if you steal my tithes. Like, there are a lot of hard limits, and it's very concerning, frustrating, and worrying that slavery wasn't one of those hard limits.
During this video, and he needs to make sure that there are laws in place to ensure that people are going to be treated fairly and properly. So to be clear, the Bible does not condone or encourage the mistreatment of slaves. However, it does allow for slavery, but this is going to lead us into the second question.
Okay, so it doesn't condone slave, which I feel like he could have said, right? Because with the whole divorce thing, it's like, oh, God really wants, a family together. He wants, man, leave your father's house and be with your wife, be together, be all these things. So if God did not want to condone slavery, he could have been like, I really don't want y'all to own people, but if you're gonna do it anyway, do it like this. Instead, God gives God gives rules on, like, these are the people you can own. Not, don't own people, but own these people. Right? It's like, don't own your was it talking to the Jews? I think so. Don't own my chosen people. Own those people instead. Right?
And there's no punishment for owning.
And there's no punishment for owning. There is a punishment for fornication, for, divorce and things like that. Like, there's societal punishments for these things. But when it came to slavery, it was more like it was expected, if anything. It was an allowance. He didn't expressly say, I do not like this thing. He could have said, I do not like this thing, but if you're gonna do it like this. You're putting words in God's word.
What exactly is slavery in the Bible? And so as we look at the
Okay. So this is another point that they always try to bring up, like, different types of slavery, right? It is wrong to own a person regardless of how you're owning them. There is no justification for treating a human being as property. Like, it's not being like, oh, but it's a different type of slavery. It wasn't like that. It was like that, because as property, you don't have any rights or saying to how you will be treated. You're at the mercy of your owner. So already this point is stupid, but let's hear him out.
concept of slavery, people became slaves in the Old Testament in a couple of different ways. So let's first deal with the case of a Hebrew enslaving or being enslaved by another Hebrew. All right.
Yeah.
So in most situations, this happened because maybe you were in debt, you were not able to pay your debt off to
Correct.
someone, or maybe you really hit hard times and you needed a place to live,
Yeah.
you needed food,
Yeah.
you needed provision, you needed clothing,
Yeah.
and you did not have the money to provide for yourself, or you couldn't pay off your debt. And as a result, all you could do was work for someone else in order to pay off your debt or to get the proper food, provision, and clothing.
I feel like if God could make manna fall out of the sky, when they were in the desert, why was he not trying to provide for those that needed it instead of them being in slavery? Like, was that the only solution that was available to God? Right? Why not give, forgive debt forgiveness? Why not he could have come up with another better way besides sell your body and your kids' kids and your kids' for your debt.
That you would need to survive. This is called indentured servanthood or indentured servitude, where you voluntarily choose to work for someone.
Okay, voluntarily is a strong word. You're not voluntarily choosing to work for someone as a slave. You have no other choice. It's not voluntarily means you have choices and you're volunteering to do this as opposed to dying. Like that's those are not you can't weigh those things. They didn't have any other choice. In order to survive, they had to do this thing. So saying voluntarily, opting to be a slave is quite dishonest.
This was one of the ways in which a person became a slave in the Old Testament, specifically regarding a Hebrew becoming a slave to another Hebrew. However, there are some very specific rules that God set in place to ensure the proper treatment of these slaves. Let's take a look at Exodus chapter 21, verses 2 through 6. It says here, if you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve for no more than 6 years. So right away, we see that God sets a limitation on how long you can own or have a slave. This person is not going to be your slave for life. You must set them free after 6 years. Notice no matter what the debt is, set them free, because it's never God's intent for you to be the property of someone else. Notice, let's keep going. Set him free in the 7th year, and he will owe you nothing for his freedom. In other words, the debt has been paid off, whatever it is. 6 years maximum sentence. If he was single when he became your slave, he shall leave
Let's see what he
single.
says.
But if he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be freed with him. Now, already you're seeing some very huge differences between the slave trade that we saw here in the United States and slavery in the Old Testament.
But it doesn't make it any better. Okay, maybe he's going to explain the parts I said and, enlighten us on what God really meant, because he knows what God's talking about.
In the United States, people were separated from their families. Women were raped. They were taken.
But they're separated when he says you can go free, but keep your wife and your kids as my slaves. Like, is that not separation of family? And you think that they're not selling the kids that are born into this? I just...
taken by slave owners, and people were separated from their families and things like that. No. In this culture, if you came in with a wife, you were to leave with that wife. Now, let's keep reading. If his master gave him a wife while he was a slave and they had sons or daughters, then only the man will be free in the 7th year, but his wife and children will still belong to his master. Now, this is pretty obvious here, but the reason for this is because let's just say you're a woman and you have a lot of debt, and you come in and let's say you've only been working for a couple of months for this particular owner, and you end up getting married off to a man who's already been there for 6 years and he's getting ready to leave. So now you get to go free with this man, and you've only served for your debt as a woman for a couple of months, but because this man is getting ready to be freed, you get to go along with him. So no, God's...
But it's not like you as a woman can decide, I want to marry this man. The slave master, the owner, gives him a wife. She doesn't decide, oh, I'm gonna seduce this man and he gonna take me when he goes free. No, the master gives the wife. What is this example he's giving? Like, oh my gosh, he's doing the most to try and find this weird... Did you hear his loophole?
No.
That is so... What? I really was wondering how he was gonna rationalize this, and I'm very disappointed, because that is stupid.
Set it up to where it's like, okay, no, if I give you a wife while you're my slave, then she belongs to me, and you can end up going free. All right, so let's keep going. But the slave may declare, I love my master, my wife, and my children. I don't want to go free. If he does this, his master must present him before God. Then his master must take him to the door or doorpost and publicly pierce his ear with an awl. After that, the slave will serve his master for life. So notice the time that you served as a slave, you could have a wife, you could have children, you could be given a wife, you had a home, you had provisions, and you could actually get paid.
I'm done. Whoa. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can do this video. Okay. It just reminded me of when people are like, yeah, but in the days of colonization or in the days of slavery, you had free housing and you were getting food and you could get a wife and you could have kids, like it's basically like free living on this man's land. And it's just like, that rationale is just so dangerous, and it makes me so angry that people think like this and are justifying this way of thinking. No, the things you're listing, the things you're listing, right? You're making it sound nice. You're making it sound like it's a good thing, right? But being given a wife and falling in love and being with someone out of your free will are two different things. They're very different things. And knowing that you're the children, so what happens to the children of those slaves? When do they get to go free? What are those rules? Are you going to address that, or are we just gonna ignore women and children like we normally do in this book?
In Deuteronomy 15, it says this: when you release a male servant, do not send him away empty handed. Give him a generous farewell gift from your flock, your threshing floor, and your winepress. Share with him some of the bounty with which the Lord your God has.
Okay, what about when you release a female servant? Do they get released of their own volition? Like,
You can see right away that there's some very huge differences between how slaves are treated in this culture and how slaves are treated in the United States.
okay, 20 acres and a mule. Please, please. Like, you can write things and be like, oh, this is what's supposed to happen. But then saying, holding the slave master accountable is like a whole another thing. Like, don't go empty handed, bountiful, whatever. But what if the slave master argues that, they had a bad harvest that year and this is all that they can give? Like, how do we, like, because people like you are always trying to find these loopholes. And I can see a lot of loopholes that allow people to get away with some tomfoolery.
They're not going to send you out the door. First of all, you're not going to get free, period. That's first thing. But even if you did get free, they're not going to send you out with a gift and a generous farewell package. No, because God was not in that, right? God here is saying, hey, let's make sure that if somebody has to hire themselves out to be a slave, which is one of the worst things that they could.
How about let's ensure that doesn't happen? Where is welfare? Where is the welfare? Was God's idea of welfare slavery? Is that what you? Because
Possible experience. Let's make sure that we treat them with dignity and respect, not as property, but as an individual. Now let's look at another way that slaves were acquired, and that was when Hebrews would acquire slaves from Gentile nations. So typically what would happen is that whenever the Israelites would go into war.
Why? Why were they going into war? Because when they told that's your land now, you should go and kill those people and get that land because that's yours now. Sounds familiar.
Would conquer these other nations. Typically, there would be one of three things that they would do. Either A, they would kill all the people who was there, so that nobody would survive. Or B, they would take,
with God's blessing,
some of the women to be their wives, which
with God's blessing
was actually an act of goodwill.
How is that an act of goodwill? Oh my gosh, they would take the woman for wives, and that was an act of goodwill. Can you imagine you and your boo thing laid up eating grapes from the vine or whatever, and then the Israelites come, right? And they're like, yeah, we're gonna take your wife as an act of goodwill. We're gonna take your woman and we're gonna go. Even not your wife, like your daughters, like your kids. They're like, yeah, we're just gonna take the girls as an act of goodwill, but we're gonna kill you though. So now my daughter or my sister, my wife has to be with these people that killed, massacred their people, their community. How is that an act of goodwill, Alan? Are you hearing yourself? Would you want your daughters, your sister, to marry and be with the person that slaughters your family?
Because these women, all the men were dead, and so how would
all the men were killed? All the men were killed by these people that are taking these women as wives.
Provide for themselves? How would they make it in society?
They wouldn't have to struggle if these people didn't come and kill their menfolk. Like, Alan, 2 + 2, real quick, 2 + 2.
It was actually an act of will, a generous goodwill for the Hebrews to take these.
This was the wrong video to make out. It's too hard. I'm tired. I should not be. Oh my gosh, I'm sweating. I'm overheating. I should have just done that Joel Osteen video. Okay.
women and allow them to have provisions and to be able to have children and things of that nature. And then the third thing is that they would take these people to be slaves, sparing their lives, but allowing them to work in the Hebrew culture. So let's see what it says about this.
Sparing their lives but allowing them to work in the Hebrew culture. Yo, you should be a politician, my friend. Because the way you are twisting these words to make it so positive. Would you like right now as you're sitting there, Alan, would you like someone to come massacre everybody around you and then spare your life by taking you in as a slave to work in their culture? No, because you believe you'd be on the Hebrew side. You believe you're the God's chosen people. You think you're an exception to the rule. You don't think you're a Gentile. But in reality, black as you are, black as I am, okay, we would never be considered as these Hebrews. Ever. We are definitely getting killed, raped, or enslaved. Okay, like, we are on that side. We are on that side of the fence.
Particular type of slavery. However, you may purchase male and female slaves from among the nations around you. You may also purchase the children of temporary residents who live among you, including those who have been born in your land.
You see how there's rules to buy people? Does that not, mentally, as a black person, does it not affect you somehow? Why am I allowed to purchase a human being? Does it not do something to your brain? Like, this doesn't feel right. Why would God allow this to be in his book, to be like, oh, you can just buy people? This is how you buy people. This is how you keep them as slaves for life. Yeah, you can just steal people and just, marry them or just enslave them. Like, if this is an all-loving, all-knowing God who cares about all his creation, why is this an exception? This should be a hard line for him to be like, no, all these are my children. I love all my creations. Don't own each other. Stop it. He can do this. He doesn't want us to sin, right? And he makes sure we're punished for that, right? You're going to burn in hell forever. But there is no punishment for owning slaves. So it's clearly not that great of an offense to this God of yours. Sorry, I had to calm down. I should have a drink.
You may treat them as your property, passing them on to your children as a permanent inheritance. You may treat them as slaves, but you must never treat your fellow Israelites
this way, which is you and me, Alan. Okay, you and me, we never gonna be treated like the Israelites were. Okay, we are the property that they're talking about. We're the ones that are gonna be passed onto their children as permanent inheritance.
So once again, yeah, it's pretty clear that the Bible does allow for slavery.
Yes.
However, the idea of mistreatment of slaves is significantly and highly condemned, and we're going to see here.
What qualifies as mistreatment? Maybe he's gonna let me know. Let me hear him out before I go off.
That there are several passages of scripture that talk about the proper treatment of slaves in this instance. Now let's read some. First and foremost, kidnapping was completely condemned and punishable in the Old Testament. Now that already is very different than the type of slavery that we saw in the United States, where Africans were kidnapped and taken away.
They were also bought, which is something that the Bible says you can do. You can buy people from your neighboring nations. They were also bought from slave traders in Africa to go to this place. So no, Alan, there actually isn't that much of a difference now, is there?
Against their will. Here it says they can purchase or buy these slaves. So let's read about this. All right, it says here, whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death.
Okay, so a man. What about the women? What about the children?
Now let's look at another verse that talks about how slaves should be treated properly and encourages the proper treatment of.
Okay, What's wrong with slavery, Alan, isn't that people are mistreated in slavery. What is wrong with slavery is that people are being owned as property by other people. That is the wrong thing. That is the mistake, not the beatings, not the forced breeding, none of that. Okay, the problem is the owning another person as property, revoking them of their humanity, sovereignty, and rights. Okay, that is the problem. So it doesn't matter how well the slave master treats you, the problem is he's a slave master. Why is that so hard to reconcile in your head?
The slave escapes from his master. Notice what it says here. If slaves should escape from their masters and take refuge with you, you must not hand them over to their masters. Let them live among you in any town they choose, and do not oppress them. So the idea is this: if a slave somehow escapes from their master, it more than likely implies that that master was mistreating or abusing that slave.
Or what if I just want to be a free person? Does it have to apply that, they must be a bad slave master? I don't know. He just adds these things without really referencing. It's like it implies that they're a bad master. Where does it say that in the verse? Show me that. If the slave escapes and the master was bad and mistreating them, then you shouldn't put them back and let them live as free men. Blah 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 blah. That's not what he read. He just read, "Oh, if he escapes, don't get him back." So I don't know why he's putting in all this extra hullabaloo of whatever he wants to be true when it's not.
And therefore, the wrong thing to do would be to send that slave back to a master who has already been abusing or mistreating them. The right thing to do would be to allow that slave to live in your vicinity.
Okay, yeah, I found my own example, Alan. Right. So imagine slave escapes, goes into your town. Then you're like, "Oh, we can let you live among us, but you have no house. You have no food. You have no way to provide for yourself. So you know what you're going to get into? Debt. You're going to get into debt, right? And depending on how these people treat you, you might not be able to repay this debt. So you know what you're going to have to do? Sell yourself into slavery again. How about that? Where's the loophole in that?
Or even in your own home. So this is yet another provision to ensure the proper treatment of slaves as individuals.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the treatment is proper. Fuck.
It says here, anyone who assaults or kills another person
must be put to death. A man and property are two different things. So this can be translated to like whoever strikes a man shall be put to death. But like a man and a slave are two different things. A slave cannot be a man. A slave is property.
Must be put to death. So right away, if you are someone who had slaves, if you knew that you killed a person, that you would actually be killed, you would give some second thought as to how you would treat these slaves.
I would like there to be for people to give a second thought to the idea of owning slaves. So clearly it's possible for people to give a second thought to certain actions that God makes concessions for. Why not slavery? Why is that so easily embraced by this God?
Law regarding injured slaves. Notice what it says here. If a man hits his male or female slave in the eye and the eye is blinded, he must let the slave go free to compensate for the eye. And if a man knocks out the tooth of his male or female slave, he must let the slave go free to compensate for the tooth.
Okay, you go free, you try to build a life, shit is really expensive, people are treating you like shit, so you know what you're gonna do when you're in debt? Go back into slavery. Like, this is just, it's a wheel, man. It's hard. Can you imagine trying to survive in those times without your eyes? Like, it's hard now because accessibility is a bitch, but imagine back in the day. Like, they weren't gonna be nice to you, especially if you didn't look like them, if you weren't Hebrew.
You see here, you don't just as a slave or just get to beat somebody and to however you want to. You don't just get carte blanche to do that. No. If you beat somebody and they have a bad eye, you have to go free. If you knock out the tooth, they have to go free. So what is this teaching? It's pretty clear that if you are a person who has slaves, it would not be in your best interest to just beat these slaves because, number one, you might kill them, which means you're going to die.
That's what I'm saying. What about don't have them at all? Why is that not the first option?
Number two, you might have to let them go free. And number three, what good is this slave to you if they can't work for a week or two because you beat them so bad, right?
Oh my
You're going to end up hurting
goodness.
yourself. So
I can't believe a black man in
An African American
man.
is saying these things. Do you not feel something? Is there nothing? Nothing. There's nothing I can say. If I have to explain to you why this is wrong, you need a better video than mine. Like, that sentence is bone chilling. It is, what good is that slave to you? Excuse me. That's a human being. Okay, that's a life. Okay, people have value beyond their utility. They have value by virtue of being human and alive and a part of fuck it's
none of these things really encourage the mistreatment of slaves in the Old Testament. And then finally, the verse in question, which is the idea of corporal punishment. And this brings us back to the verse I read at the very beginning of this particular video. It says this: if a man beats his male or female slave with a club and the slave dies as a result, the owner must be punished. But if the slave recovers within a day or two, then the owner shall.
So you see what I was saying. Initially when it's like if you kill a man, you'll be put to death. Right. But here it's saying if you beat and your slave dies, then you must be punished. They're not explicitly saying what the punishment. It's not you also will be put to death. That's not the punishment they've done here. They just said you will be punished, right? I don't know who says what the punishment is, how you pay it off, etc, etc. But it further proves my point that if you're a slave, you are not a man. So that verse that he showed us was useless, just like his brain right now. Useless.
But if you have someone who is a slave and they get out of order, they mistreat you, they do something wrong, let's just say they try to sleep with your wife or something like that.
You see how he goes to like the extreme. It's less likely that a slave would try to sleep with your wife, and more likely that a slave would try to get a little extra food because they're not getting enough. Okay, so they might steal a loaf of bread, right? And stealing is wrong according to your laws. So then he must be beat. He won't use those small, reasonable examples. He'll just go straight to the jugular of like, oh, he's gonna try to sleep with your wife. That's why. No slave is gonna try to sleep with your wife.
To discipline them strongly to make sure that they don't get out of line again.
Yeah, like bug breaking.
What it's talking about. But you don't want to go too far in terms of your discipline, in terms of how you punish.
Yeah, because bug breaking, you wouldn't lose a tooth, you wouldn't lose an eye or anything when that was happening. So does it make bug breaking okay? Is that a reasonable form of punishment?
This particular person. Now, the third and final thing we'll look at is, does Jesus condone the beating of slaves in the New Testament?
I'm tired of this cult leader, guys. Yeah.
Of his parable. So when we come to Luke chapter 12, verses 47 and 48, it says this: and a servant who knows what the master wants but isn't prepared and doesn't carry out those instructions will be severely punished. But someone who does not know and then does something wrong will be punished only lightly.
Okay. He's not done.
When someone has been given much, much will be required in return, and when someone has been entrusted with much, even more will be required.
Okay, right. I was watching a video on the nannies, the Kardashian nannies, right? They get paid a decent amount, you know, you're living good, you're flying private, you're doing all these things. So there's a lot of expectations in the quality of care that they have for their extremely privileged children, right? Some of these standards cannot be met, right? And that's why they hire other people to do it, because they themselves acknowledge that they cannot meet these standards, right? So some of these requirements that these slave masters, not saying the Kardashians are slave masters, but I'm giving an example, as in like sometimes you're hired for a job and sometimes the requirements are ridiculous and you actually cannot meet them. Nobody can meet these requirements, right? So who's to say a slave master won't be pissed at his slaves or have extremely high standards that make no sense that he sets for his slaves to meet because he's super rich or whatever, and they don't meet them every time? He has the right to punish them every single time. Like, do you not see these loopholes?
So once again, guys, this is the reason why it is so important for you and I to have a strong hermeneutic, a strong method for for how we study the Bible, because many
A
atheists
method of lying to yourself, Alan. You are lying to yourself. You're teaching other people how to lie to themselves. This is sad. You're making me sad, and I don't want to be sad.
and skeptics would just take verses like this, cherry pick them, pull them directly out of their context, and try to make the Bible say something that it doesn't say.
The fact that you think your context is okay is what hurts me, man. There's nothing okay about your context at all. Everything you've said is wrong, and I've only been listening to you. Like, it's sad, man. Yeah.
If you look at the context of this particular parable that Jesus is talking about or teaching here, it's clearly talking about the importance of how we should govern ourselves as we await the Lord's return. And basically, the idea is this. It's talking about how different people will be punished in the coming age in terms of those who reject Jesus. So those who...
Do you know people thought that they weren't even going to... They were going to see the end of days. The people that wrote the Bible thought they were going to see the end of days. And that timeline is long gone. Like, it's gone. And yet people are still out here believing like they will be the one to see the end of days.
Firm knowledge of who Jesus is. Maybe people who have grown up in the United States. Maybe they've been to church their whole life. Maybe they grow up in church, but they never accepted Jesus as Savior. You have a firm knowledge of who your master is, but you did not do what you have heard many times that the master has told you to do, which is accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior.
Is God the slave master? Is he just saying that we're all slaves to God? Because that's what we've been talking about. And he's saying we're not obeying our master. So are we still slaves to God? Is that it?
That particular person is going to be severely punished. But let's just say you have somebody who doesn't know about Jesus. They don't have a firm understanding.
Oh my gosh, that is what he's saying.
They don't get a free pass to heaven, but the punishment in the next life in hell is going to be significantly less for that particular servant because they did not have the same understanding about Jesus as opposed to someone who did. That's what the parable is talking about. Jesus is not encouraging the beating or mistreatment of slaves in this particular parable. So once again, guys, in order to really and truly navigate through some of these difficult passages, it really...
Why are they difficult? It's the word of God. If you believe it, it shouldn't be difficult.
Is helpful to you for you to have a strong grasp on how to study the Word of God for yourself. So if you are looking to take your Bible study up to the next level and you want to study the Bible like a theologian, you want to study
I think he's just going... I think he's gonna just sell stuff now. Yeah, that's the video. I'm upset. I'm tired. No. Right? Yeah, it's just sad. It makes me really sad that, as black people, we still are having to battle our own people to realize that being a slave is a bad thing and something that we shouldn't be making excuses for, and it's not okay. No matter the context, no matter the situation, it's just not okay. And it really hurts me because I do know people personally, like in my family, in my circle, that really believe that black people are a cursed people and deserve to be colonized and be slaves still, and that the white man deserves to be in power, and they really believe everything that he's saying, that we must abide by authority. And if we did that, if our ancestors just listened to the Bible and listened to authority, then we wouldn't be, free as we are now. We're not all the way there, but we're definitely in a much better place because we had ancestors that were willing to revolt, willing to stand up, and willing to fight for us. And that's what I'm willing to do, is to fight for the young Africans to come to be able to reject religion and acknowledge the harm it's done to my generation and before, and be able to undo all that trauma and rescue us from this nonsense. Okay, and yeah, I'm really excited to see a community of like-minded folks to grow and help me through this, because This is hard, y'all. This hurts. But yeah, I'm trying to be more consistent with these videos. Don't know how that's gonna go, but I'm gonna try my best because I do care about this. And like, comment, share, subscribe if you want to, invite somebody to the other side. Or just start discussions with other people that you've never really had. And comment any of your favorite pastas and stuff so we can look into this stuff together. Right. Thanks for watching. And bye. No, thank you.